Working Cows Podcast, episode 186.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, here with another episode for you guys, powered by the Global Ag Network. And as always, excited to be joined today by Logan Pribbeno. And last time I had Logan on, we talked about a tweet of his that was about he's going to change his job title to CEO of That Won't Work Here LLC, or change the name of the ranch to That Won't Work Here or whatever, and just talking about some of the out-of-the-box things they were doing on farm ground down there. And his episode will be linked in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/186. But also this episode today was inspired by another tweet of Logan's. So I guess maybe the lesson learned there is get on Twitter and follow Logan Pribbeno at Nebrascaro. And that will also be linked in the show notes page for today, as well as embedded the tweet that he sent that inspired this conversation on range monitoring. We're going to talk about the who, what, when, where, and how, and why of range monitoring at the Wine Glass Ranch. And again, not intentional with last week's guest, James Rogers from the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch, but just the way it worked out. So anyways, we're going to talk range monitoring with Logan Pribbeno today. Logan, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Hey, glad to be back, Clay.
Always interested in your Twitter feed. And the other day, again, I think last time we talked, we were talking about you were the CEO of That Won't Work Here Incorporated or something like that. So and that was a tweet from you. And then just last week, I think you dropped another tweet of talking about your kind of what you're doing for range monitoring and some of those things. So I guess first let's kind of set the stage with what it is that you're doing for range monitoring, and then we'll talk about kind of how that informs decision making going forward.
Well, the picture that piqued your interest was TJ and I were out clipping the range. So every March we'll go out where we have some deferral cages, which is just a cut up pyramid looking deferral cage made out of a cow panel. And what we'll do is in 3 different pastures, we'll have 2 different cages, and we'll take 3 different clippings. And this is big picture, 10,000 foot views. This is to kind of calibrate our eye for what we grew, what we harvested on the first grazing, and what we harvested on the second grazing, and then, what was left going into the winter. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And so what we'll do is we'll just clip the ground bare, and then weigh the grass to see, how much grass did we grow in this paddock and how much did we harvest off the paddock. And what I've learned in 4 years or 4 to 5 years of doing this is it's wildly erratic.
And what do you mean wildly erratic? Year to year, within paddock to paddock, within one paddock, it can be wildly erratic. What are you talking about there?
It all of the above. It's chaos. And the more I learn about natural ecosystems, the more I have an understanding or even like an appreciation of chaos. As managers, sometimes we feel, and it's our job to limit that chaos, but it's still ever prevalent. What I find is in a good year, I have some great spots, and in a bad year, I have some great spots, and vice versa. The biggest takeaway I guess I've had in doing it for multiple years is that my good ground and my good areas, before I did this, I thought it was like 20% more productive. And I tried to account for that in my grazing plan, maybe a plus 20 and even at a minus 20. And what I'm learning is that, the good stuff is at least twice as good. So the variability in a somewhat uniform property. We don't have wet meadows and upland. We're pretty much universally upland. The variability is way more than I would have anticipated.
So, how are those cages made? If I'm guessing, I'd say they were like a hog panel kind of cut into the shape of a cone or a pyramid. Or
yes, and there's a great YouTube video on how to make these, and I think Land EKG hosts the video. And true to Logan Pribbeno fashion, I had to fabricate a couple that were terrible before I figured out how to do it right. So I don't just go try to make a pyramid on your own. That find some help and do it right the first time. Not like me.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm a little bit behind in releasing what I've recorded, which is a good problem to have, but I'm not exactly sure what the show notes page is going to be today, but there will be a link. There will be an embedded video from Land EKG with the how to make these exclusion pyramids, if that's the right term, for in the show notes page for today, and I will mention it in the intro and in the outro, so to speak, what that show notes page for today is going to be. But I guess you said that you are measuring what you harvested with the first graze.
Mm-hmm.
So are these placed after the first graze?
So we place one to start the year, and then we graze it one time. And to back up just a little bit, our typical pasture gets grazed twice a year for about a week.
Total each time?
Each time. So 1 week each time. So our average paddock gets grazed for 2 weeks out of the year, hopefully separated by 60 to 75 up to 100 days, depending on a lot of different things.
Sure. Yep. So back to when and how they're placed. You graze once, or you have them out there before you even turn out the first time. Is that right?
Correct. Okay. Total deferral cage is out now, so it'll collect grass and rain for the calendar year.
Okay. And then are there other cages that are placed after the first graze or not?
Yep. After the first graze there in the spring or early summer, there's another cage just sitting out there, and we'll go move it and put it to capture what we grow in grass off after the first graze. Okay.
Can you talk about strategy of placement as far as location, species, kind of maybe even some indicator species that you're trying to, look after and see how they're being affected by the grazing? Can you talk about some of those strategies?
We're not, with this cast, we're not necessarily looking at specific species. In general, though, we talk about, we want these to be in pretty representative spot of the pasture, right? So you don't want to go to the lowest spot in the pasture and go set your graze cage out there, and you don't want to go set it on the highest hilltop. So we want to be we want some angle to it. We want to just a pretty average reading of the pasture, and we don't have the best pasture monitoring system around. I know many operators that do a little bit better job in terms of managing what species are growing, basal cover, succession, and all that. We're a little bit more primarily concerned about utilization. The graze cage, at least, this has really helped me quantify how many AUMs did I produce last year, how many did I take off, and what was left. And this tool, the grazing cage, at least, is for us a tool to track utilization.
Who would you say has been the biggest influence in doing this the way that you're doing it?
Gosh, good question. I've worked with Jim Garish, who really kind of got me started down this route. Bob Scriven too was consulting on Neighbor's Place and provided some interesting data that didn't fit with what I was expecting. And it wasn't my place, but a neighboring place north and east of here. He thought that we should be growing 4,000 pounds per acre per year on 20 inches of precip and utilizing 60% of it, which was 2,400 pounds, which is, approaching 3 AUMs harvested. And that really got me thinking. And that is beyond double what we get, which is beyond quadruple what a neighboring place would get.
Right.
Then had Jim Garish out to do a one-day consulting, and he helped us dial it in. He dialed it back, and he kind of more thought that we should be like in the 3,000 pounds dry matter grown, and then harvesting maybe 60% of that, which is something we're kind of striving to get toward. So Jim Garish kind of started me on this path to really think about utilization and what we're growing, and the grazing cage was just the best tool there was to measure this. And when Jim was out, he saw, you got to know Jim Garish, but and I love him. He'll tell you what he thinks. You don't ever have to wonder exactly, man, I wonder what he thinks of this. But he saw our grazing cage that sticked up too high so the cattle could rub on it. It was bad for a lot of reasons. And we pull up to it, and I'm with my ranch managers, and Jim Garish gets out of the pickup, and he said, "What's this useless contraption for?" I said, "Well, Jim, thanks. We're trying to attempt to measure something." He said, "Well, I don't think you're doing a very good job." So I think Jim was the one that got us started on this path and helped us figure out how to do a better job of it anyway.
Sure. It sounded like a Jim Garish monitoring tactic, and I've spent a little time with Jim, at some continuing education stuff at Derek Schwannebeck's place. He put on a regenerative grazing deal there, and so I've been in the crosshairs. But it also, what it brought to mind to me was kind of some of the things that Burke Tigert would say are worth measuring, kind of total production on the ranch year over year. Is it increasing or decreasing? Is it something are we moving in the right direction? I guess was another one that came to mind, I guess.
And Burke was out as well and helped us refine this as well. And hinted that we don't do the best job on rangeland monitoring, and part of the reason for that is kind of a Burke Tigert principle of, if you do, there's a law of diminishing returns, right? So I could go and categorize every grass blade, in a paddock, and, I could really get lost in the weeds on this. And what would happen is that it would probably not significantly change my management, and I'd get burnt out in doing it, and I'd just stop altogether doing rangeland monitoring. So the graze cage, in combination with some tour pastures and some other more high level stuff, I think we created a really good system where, for at least a couple of decades, we've been able to keep it going, which is the most important part. And that's a Tigert got me thinking about, what half of something that we can do that we're going to be able to stick with that's going to provide maybe 80% of the return total.
And that was exactly what I had written down for another question, is kind of what is that point of diminishing returns? I was going to ask, is there? And what is that point of diminishing returns for you? About how many cages per paddock, or maybe over the whole ranch? Do you move those? We observed in this paddock last year, let's observe somewhere else, or is the true value observing in the same paddock for a number of years? So how about some of those, kind of the way you guys are thinking about some of those things?
Good. Good question. We've got three properties, a lot of variability between them and within themselves. I'm learning, for an average guy, he'd look at the three properties and it'd look pretty uniform. But we have different range sites on all three. And we are consistently in the same paddock. So there is some year over year consistency in collecting the same data within the same paddock and somewhat near the same range site. We don't go from one end of the paddock to the other, but we do rotate it by 100 feet every year. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cages out total. The kicker of this too is you got to get your boots on the ground. Whatever it is that you're just personally willing to do as the ecosystem manager, that's probably the best. And this isn't my idea. I've learned it from many other people, Dave Pratt as well. You can't evaluate pasture through the windshield. Provide some really good examples in a blog post, and I think a book or a chapter in his book. But whatever you're doing, if you could just put your boots on the ground, I think you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So whatever it is that you're doing, don't make it so complicated that you'll be tempted to outsource it or kind of delay it. Just put your boots on the ground.
Yep, and that's the caption for the tweet. A farmer's footsteps is the best fertilizer, and then $100 an hour work. So we're talking about the difference between working in the business and working on the business here in the rangeland monitoring side of things. TJ commented later and said, watch it with the F word there. Was he talking about farmer or fertilizer?
He was talking about farmer.
Okay. All right.
He's a little different than I am. I fully embrace the grass farmer.
Sure.
I'm not. I'm a farmer as well too, a dryland, farmer. So I have no problem with it. But I do. I view I don't see a big difference between my field of milo and my field of grass. And I do believe that my paddocks are fields, and I seek to grow grass, and I embrace that mentality. And I know a lot of Nebraska in particular that people want to designate themselves as farmers or ranchers, but I'm a blurred line there, so I don't mind the term at all.
Shane Barber's fond of the term string farmer, because you're going out putting up string, and then you're going out taking down string. So it's just a constant raising up and knocking down strings. So that's another way to look at it. So with this strategy, what are you learning? What is it telling you? How is it informing decision making going forward?
Utilization, I'm particularly concerned with. It's tied directly to the economics of the place. I rent the grass from my family members, various family members, for fair market rent in Nebraska, which is absorbently high. And I learned very early on that, man, if I can increase utilization, my bills drop substantially in relation to maybe the pounds that I can harvest. So it's a utilization tool. And I think that's one of the things I'm proud of is increasing the utilization, taking it to the edge, and still, being mindful of, ground cover, keeping density where it needs to be so that you can sustain the grassland resource, or even, make it more resilient. And I think where we're at, I think there's a lot more. I think in 10 years, utilization's got a whole nother frontier that we'll be on. And so, utilization, to conclude that rant.
What is that utilization that you're measuring? It's just pounds grown, pounds harvested. That is the formula, as simple as that.
I do. That would be it. I manage very closely AUMs harvested on our rangeland and our cover crops and other places. And we are primarily stocker too. So we've got weights. We're weighing pretty often. We're sorting pretty often. So I got a pretty good handle on pounds harvested too, where as 10 years ago, that would have been pretty elusive to gather, but we can kind of dial that in. Interesting note on that. Just last year, we were 13% under our annual precipitation, and our AUMs were 13% under our annual precipitation. Or sorry, our AUMs harvested were 13% less, which makes sense, right? That is probably perfectly in line with what needed to happen. The interesting thing is our beef pounds harvested off of the range increased 20%, which, and to put it in like layman's term, we did less work and we made more money, which is kind of cool to know and understand. But it's fun to do these things and to try to push it.
Yeah. So there was no destocking then involved in that 13% less moisture?
No, there was. So our AUMs harvested per acre were 13%.
Gotcha.
So there was destocking. We had fewer animals, but the pounds, like the ADG and the pounds harvested, increased on the fewer days, on the fewer AUMs harvested.
Right. Yeah. And so do you have any idea what that's attributed to?
I do. I think it is unique to the Nebraska Sandhills. We're infamous for growing a lot of grass, a lot of very low octane grass. And it's not unique in the Sandhills. For breed up to enhance, yearling performance to enhance, pretty much all of the animal performance metrics increase when you're a little dry. And last year seemed to be a really happy medium between, being dry, but kind of getting timely rains. Yeah. And I'd take another one just like it.
We had the same experience. I've said a lot of times that last year didn't feel as dry as it was because the rains came kind of in the right time.
Same with us. Very similar experience. It was not a drought. We're on the drought monitor, but it didn't feel like a drought. And Clay, you know this as well as anyone, but that kind of speaks to the resiliency of the prairie. And it can be pushed and it can be played with. It's, chaos is not bad for the ecosystem. And I think we experienced that last year.
What sets you apart in the way that you're approaching this range monitoring from others that you're aware of doing similar things? Good question.
I've been thinking a lot, and I've been talking with some guys about this. Chris Hessler, who is on the Nature Conservancy side, it just brings a totally different component to it. I was able to spend a couple of days with him a couple of years ago and talk about how they manage the prairie in its more natural setting. Fascinating. He believes that the way that we as ranchers in our rotational grazing system manage cattle is not native to the prairie, and therefore not a good management strategy for the Nature Conservancy. He and this chaos thing kind of comes from him, and he tries to manage it with chaos, and that involves overgrazing, it involves fire, it involves undergrazing, it involves multi-species grazing, and he challenged me to think that we can a rancher, in our minds, when we damage the prairie, we think, that's bad, especially in the Sandhills, right? Because it can come around and bite you quicker in that ecosystem than others. And his point is prairies are more resilient than we give them credit for. Management wise, what that looks like, one thing I've started doing differently is we harvest on our native range. We have a stalker system that we kind of got into last year, Clay, where I can put a lot of animals on the range in May, June, and July. For example, half of our AUMs harvested occur in May, June, and July. And I think that the prairie is particularly resilient at that time. And so for May and June, I look at every group every week, and I do what's best for the steers, and I do what's best for the heifers. And we kind of chase grass, which would not have been a practice that Wineglass Ranch would have pursued maybe 20 years ago. But with this chaos theory, and maybe more with this, hey, you can push the prairies more resilient than we give it credit to. I moved the lever back to maybe a higher animal performance metric for a very slim period of time, and I think that is unique. I think among rotational grazers, especially seasoned rotational grazers that are trying to build up their grassland ecosystem.
A couple of things on that. First of all, would you say that in May and June you just pretend like you live in Missouri and it's going to rain again?
Yes. Yeah. That's pretty much it. And sometimes I'm right.
Yeah. and then the second one on that is, have you ever been exposed to Andre Voisin and his rational grazing as opposed to rotational grazing?
I have not been exposed to that. Is that more like Jamie Alonso and what he's doing?
Could be. I don't know. The only one I've ever had explain it to me, oh man, I'm going to forget his name, is Daniel. He's from Mexico. I interviewed him on the podcast, and he lives in southern Mexico. He gets like 60 inches of rain a year. And he said the difference between rotational grazing and rational grazing is rotational grazing kind of follows, we go here, then here, then here. And rational grazing is about paddock jumping and saying, over there is where we need to be now. And I know it's not the next paddock in the rotation, but we're going to jump over there and get it if I can. Daniel Suarez. I didn't even have to go to my episodes page to look it up. Daniel Suarez is the one I'm thinking of. But so that's kind of what would that be kind of what you're doing is finding places that are going to be best for animal performance and moving within reason to those places?
Yeah, I needed to maybe dive into that a little bit more, because I'd say that's exactly what we do for May and June. It's this, we call it the steer show. So, kind of where there's grass, we're able and agile, and we're moving there. Yeah.
I think, maybe the book, and I'm not sure, but if I've got my lineage right here, but I think really the book that set, Alan Savory off was Voisin's, grass productivity. And so he's in France, and I think he's maybe in the 30s and 40s. So there's some reading material fodder there for you, I guess.
No, I'll check it out. I'm familiar with the name, but I haven't read his stuff personally.
Yep. And then he's got another one, grass cancer and something else that everybody speaks very highly of, and that's more maybe on the health side of things, of course. But interesting stuff from a guy who, I don't know, at that point probably didn't have a lot of electron microscope data to back up his instincts, but his instincts proved to be right, I think, in a lot of ways.
Different era back then.
Yeah, for sure. So you had some numbers there below that picture, and one of them, residual, is 1,200 pounds of dry matter per acre. Is that in line with not being afraid to waste grass?
That is, in particular, that is our most productive ranch and above average pasture in that. We are forced to waste some grass every year, which is kind of cool. It's built into our system. We go into corn stalks as early as we can, which is generally about the middle of November, maybe the first part of that. And then we start getting kicked off right now. Every year we need to save at least a month's worth of grass to come home to. And we've been forced to do that for, since we switched to May calving in the late 80s or early 90s. And that's been a benefit to us, is to be forced to waste grass. As Jim said when he was here, that he drills that into people, because we don't inherently think that wasting grass is a good idea. So, that 1,200 pounds DM left, we're coming home to here in a couple of weeks to graze on.
Yeah. And Jim has some great, matrices or spreadsheets or formulas. I don't know how you would describe them necessarily, about if you've got this much productivity or this much ground cover, you need to leave this much residual and this much rainfall to go along with it. Some people, in the class, myself included, given the current state of my range's health, were in that you need to leave 70% behind every year so that you can get enough litter laid down and that, thatch layer over the soil and start building some of that underground biology to be the driver of health, rangeland health.
It's amazing what cover will do. I think we're learning more and more of that. I mean, it kind of does it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the indispensable tools for you for rangeland monitoring? I look at this picture and I see a hoop, I see a paper sack, I see clippers, and then I see your exclusion cage in the background there. What are some of the indispensable tools for rangeland monitoring for you?
Oh, everything that you mentioned. We also do photo plots every October, and we have those going back 25 years. And it's just kind of a more simple thing. And this is the same spot, the exact same spot every year, every October, late October. And we take one looking across and put just a gas can out there, and then we take one, 30 feet away looking down. So those are kind of the tools that we use. The indispensable tool, though, is your farmer's footsteps. It's the farmer's shadow. I just can't stress enough. The ability to read grass comes with a lot of mistakes, a lot of not doing it right. And unless you're going to put shadow on your fields, you're not going to know what was right. You're not going to necessarily know what was wrong. You're just kind of going to close stuff out, and it's going to be a question mark. So I am the guy where it's just, there's nothing that can replace the farmer putting the shadow on their field. So that would be the only indispensable tool I'd put on the list.
Sure. And you said you were weighing these samples just on a kitchen scale or something like that?
Yeah, just a gram scale that we have. I got it from Nebraska Grazing Coalition. Has a kit that you can buy, and it's subsidized, and they'll even send someone to show you how to use it. And that's, I guess, the scale. That's a good question, Clay. The scale really helped me dial in my eye, and I can do a lot of stuff with my eye. I'm not there on the scale, though. I can kind of read a little bit of AUMs, but man, when I pull out that scale, it kind of reveals some surprises to me. I'm not dialed in there. So I'd say my shadow and my scale maybe are the two best tools.
Sure. I wanted to pick up on something else you mentioned and something that kind of went along with the conversation that we had just a couple of texts back and forth setting this up. But I don't want to move on from range monitoring too soon. If there's something else that we need to point out or cover in regards to that, where we're headed isn't too far removed from it. But I didn't want to leave anything too major on the table before we move on.
No, let's jump there.
Okay, you mentioned earlier, moving to May and June calving, and I think that maybe the more helpful definition is ranching or calving in sync with nature, calving in sync with the forage supply on your ranch, because May and June calving doesn't work everywhere, but calving in sync with what your ranch is supplying as far as nutrient, or matching your herd's nutrient demand to your ranch's forage supply quality and quantity is maybe a way that I'm just trying to get away from offering a recipe more or less. But anyways, you said that you guys have been doing that since, I think since the mid 80s or something like that, or quite a while. And in our conversation setting this up, you mentioned kind of the benefits or the uniqueness of your position of being kind of a second generation grazer. And I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about and hear your perspective on some of those benefits.
Yeah, well, I identify as a second generation management intensive grazer. My dad started this stuff when, everyone said it wasn't going to work. It was a wagon wheel system too in the sandhills, and there's some stuff that didn't work about it. And it's painful to find those out, right? We had to go in and change a lot. And like the initial vision didn't work. Planning is useless. Or sorry, the inverse of that. Plans are useless. Planning is invaluable.
Right.
So we've had to tweak it. And I was very blessed to kind of hop on board when a lot of those hard learning experiences were past us. So I didn't have to learn some stuff the hard way. I've had to learn a whole nother set of things the hard way. There's a self-doubt too when you're doing something that's crazy like this and no one else believes it can work, especially in the 90s. You wonder if you're even in the right ballpark. 10 years ago I came back, and the time to debate the merits of management intensive grazing are long behind us. And in a wine glass, I never had to experiment with it. I never had to convince my dad or my grandpa that we should be doing it. It was, here's the system, improve on it. We're not stationary, and being stationary didn't work from the beginning. And so I've been able to do that. And I strongly consider it a blessing in that I was able to start standing on someone else's shoulders in this rotational grazing system and challenged to take it further. And that's what I'm doing, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't have to start from square one.
Would you say that the tweaking, the improvements continues to be at the margins, or are there fundamental shifts yet to be made, or that you're still considering as far as the grazing, maybe secondarily, the business model, maybe primarily?
Good question. And yeah, two parts. The margins too, it was a whole nother subset, right? And the further you go down this rabbit hole, the more your animal performance is going to decrease. But we are challenged with ever increasing the utilization, and where Jim thinks we can go is we can get another double. We doubled it once, and with the right management, we can double it again. And I've got a vision for the future, and not just me. I'm talking with a lot of other guys locally, and all the way up to Montana, down to Texas. We're kind of doing the 5-day deal right now. We'll stay in a pasture for 4, 5, 6, or 7 days if it's a big one. We'll hit it twice a year. I've seen the future, and kind of Jamie Alonso was at Maddox Cattle Company 2 years ago, and they did a 4-hour grazing allocation with 900 first calf heifer pairs, and they did it for 2 days. And seeing is believing, right? And I think there is a future, and I think that next double is going to become. You're going to have the second generation guys, or maybe the first generation guys, that are just going to lap us. I think they're going to start putting poly out on the range where poly, hasn't really been before. And there's some guys out there trying it, and then they're testing it. And I think in 2030, that's going to be the new management intensive grazing. I think that's the future of range utilization.
Subdivision of a larger paddock that's already part of a management intensive system. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So dialing it down onto a day or even like a half day move.
And yeah, that's a good one. What's driving you? What's driving you as far as continuing to push the envelope, continuing to work, at the margins, or chase the rabbit down the hole? What's driving you to continue doing that?
Man, it's the cost structure and the percentage of my costs that are tied up in this land resource are massive, and any extra I can tweak out of it, will be rewarded handsomely. And there's that component. There's the acquisition of capital would be my number one goal. My number two goal would be to be regenerative, notably in that order, I think, to some other people.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that a growth pattern is involved here, and the ability to get twice as much once and then twice as much again is going to open the window of opportunity to A, collect capital, and B, to create a resilient landscape and soil community behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a good question I was going to go to next, and I spaced it out while I was listening to you answer it. That one we'll come back around to it. How are you laying out the plan to get to that next step, to get to that next position that you see? This is where I want to be in 5 years. How are you thinking about how are we going to get there? Is it a series of smaller steps between here and there? Is there coming a day when you just rip the Band-Aid off and you start subdividing things, or what are some of the challenges between here and where you want to be?
So we are doing poly. We are doing this on our cover crops. So on our sorghum and crops that we grow, we sometimes we'll do 1 day allocations. We actually went to 2 day allocations to kind of increase the cover left behind. So I've got a barn full of poly, and I got a crew that puts out poly, and we're already really harvesting operation. I have not extensively taking that onto the range. I do think that is the future. How to do it sustainably from a labor standpoint is a big question. My dad, who was doing this a long time ago, knew many people that went very intensive on their grazing, doing what we're talking about. And universally, they all abandoned it. Mm-hmm. Right? It seemed to be an unsustainable effort. It's not fun to go put out poly every day. It's not enjoyable. It almost warrants like a full-time position where even maybe it is a high turnover position, or maybe a highly promoted out of position. But I don't think principal operators are willing to go out there and put out poly and roll up poly every day of the year. And so the labor and the return and the sustainability of that labor, I think, is the big question mark. And that's yet to be figured out, I think, as the industry.
So I remembered my question. Is there a simpler business model that could lead to that acquisition of capital, or is cow-calf stockers heifer development? And if I'm missing any pieces of your business model, you can add those in too. But is the current enterprise mix at Wineglass the fastest way to acquire capial?
That's a good question. If it's anything, it's not simple. It is. We are, we're installing modifications on our, like the Lamborghini system that we're running, and there's no way that it could be simple, could be described. Like the old turnout method. Those were the days. I'm a farmer. I'm a grass farmer, so I don't particularly long for them. But many people do. They want to walk around in spurs and kind of ride the range. And the old turnout method, there's nothing more simple than that. But that method was based on free grazing, the open range. And, managing ecosystems and harvesting capital from them is complex. Peter Drucker there said that, there is no economics in nature. Its return is zero. It's only managers that make ecosystems return. And so it is not simple. It's complex right now. I do have a good crew too, Clay. It's not just me and my dad. I've got some outstanding employees and a team of even hourly employees I get to use at my disposal. So we do get paid a return for the complexity. But ultimately, it is a complex system, and it seems to me that the more work you're willing to do, perhaps the more return is available for you.
So it was a yes or no question, I think. So I'm gonna push on a little bit.
I'm glad you are.
Is there a simpler business model that would net you the same amount of capital acquisition at the same speed, or greater capital acquisition at a faster speed, or is the current mix the fastest that you can accomplish that number one goal that you outlined earlier?
And the answer is, the system that we have is the best. I'm going to misattribute this, but Ryan Noble and I were talking about it last year, and he said a lot of ranchers are, I'm cow-calf, or, I'm stocker, or, I'm a sheep herder, or what have you. And Ryan said, we forget that we're in the livestock business. And that was a really good way to describe how we view our management of this resource. I don't get caught up in class of animals or crops that can be grown, or where can we grow forage, or where can we grow crops. I love blurring lines. It's my specialty. I'm not a one-way thinker. And so our enterprise mix changes every year to what we think is going to reap the most. And so today we're mostly stock, or maybe we're mostly steers, and we're moving more to heifers. And, in years coming, I don't anticipate being mostly steers. So we are pretty flexible. And as Ryan said, I'm in the livestock industry, period. And I try to find a value. I try to buy a value, and I try to upgrade it. And that is in grazing lands, and it's also in the bovines that we run.
Yeah. And that kind of answers the next question, I guess. But I'll let you speak to it a little bit if you want to. And that is, what percentage of the herd at Wineglass is expendable, or is fluid, is easily marketable. I mean, I guess is kind of where I was going with that, or maybe the better question is, how much of the fact that what you have being the best tool for acquiring capital has to do with the fact that these animals are or this herd is flexible. We can ramp it up, we can scale it back depending on what nature is providing to us.
Was it Bud Williams that said most ranchers love their cows and hate their grass?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's part of like the advantage of the second generation. Like, I hate my cows. They're in the wrong. There's a billion things I'd change about them. They're in the wrong spot at the wrong time most of the time. I embrace that, and I always have. I never did fall in love with a steer or a cow, and I'm very, very flexible, and I try to be rational. It's all emotion, for sure, but I try to be as rational as we can, and I don't get hung up in anything. And we chase different programs, we chase different margins, we chase different classes of cattle. And everything's temporary. Right now the GAP program is just firing, and it's looking like last year was excellent. It looks like we're going to have another great year. That's going to go away. In 5 years it'll be something else, and you just got to constantly be improving, seeking the edge, and seeking the margin. And that's the only advantage, is your ability to improve.
And that going away of the GAP program, you're talking are you saying more from a perspective of that market will be saturated, other people will be on board, and the return won't be as lucrative as it has been?
Yeah, I do anticipate that. I think it created a lot of splash the last couple of years. I got quite a few phone calls, and I think we'll get another couple of years out of it.
Yep.
But then, the market demands a return to zero. So we'll start heading towards that direction, I think, as more people get involved, and I welcome it.
Right. And there will be something else. So, I mean, a lot of what you're talking about here is analyzing the demands of the market and seeking to organize the enterprise mix at Wineglass in such a way that you can meet the demands of that market in a timely manner. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Well, very good. I really appreciate your time today. It's been good as always to chat with you. Any other links, resources I could put up at the show notes page, or anything else that we missed?
Man, not that I can think of. You had some great questions. I had a page of notes that I wanted to cover, and I'm looking at it now, and I think we hit on every one of them.
Oh, great. Good deal. Well, very good. I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
All right. Thanks, Clay. Appreciate it. Always
good stuff with Logan, and encourage you to check out the show notes page, workingcows.net/186. Sorry, workingcows.net/186 is the show notes page for today, and would encourage you to go on there and follow all of the social media channels. Go out and get connected with us on social media. There'll be links to all of our social platforms there at workingcows.net/186. Coming up next week for episode 187, we're talking to Justin Frichte and Jared Knock of Millborn Seeds. We're going to talk to them about their new podcast, Roots and Ruminants, and very good couple of episodes they've got out so far, and releasing episodes on a monthly basis from here on out. We're going to have a conversation with them about those two things, Roots and Ruminants. Why did they choose that for the title of their podcast? What and how are we impacting those things in a positive way? So really looking forward to that discussion next week for episode 187 of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.